Welcome to the Ultimate SC300 Exam Masterclass. I've earned 30 plus certifications, and I'm here to guide you to success on your exam. This PDF in the description is your shortcut. Use these strategies wisely and crack your exam in one go. Revise this PDF 2 to 3 times, and you'll feel the difference in your confidence. Let's jump straight into the most important questions for your success. Question 1. You have a Microsoft Entra tenant. You need to configure protected actions to require privileged users to use phishing-resistant multi-factor authentication (MFA). What should you do first? A. Create an access package. B. Configure an authentication strength for the tenant. C. Add an authentication context. D. Create a conditional access policy. Correct answer, C. Add an authentication context. Explanation: authentication context is required before applying protected actions. It helps conditional access enforce phishing-resistant MFA for sensitive actions. Question 2. You have an Azure AD tenant. You need to implement Smart Lockout with a lockout threshold of 10 failed sign-ins. What should you configure in the Azure AD Admin Center? A. Authentication strengths. B. Password protection. C. User risk policy. D. Sign-in risk policy. Correct answer, B. Password protection. Explanation: Smart Lockout settings are configured under password protection. It protects accounts by blocking repeated failed sign-in attempts. Question 3. You have an Azure Active Directory (Azure AD) tenant named Contoso.com that has Azure AD identity protection enabled. You need to implement a sign-in risk remediation policy without blocking user access. What should you do first? A. Configure access reviews in Azure AD. B. Enforce Azure AD password protection. C. Configure self-service password reset (SSPR) for all users. D. Implement multi-factor authentication (MFA) for all users. Correct answer, D. Implement multi-factor authentication (MFA) for all users. Explanation: MFA allows risky sign-ins to be remediated without blocking users. Users can verify identity securely and continue accessing resources. Question 4. You have a Microsoft Entra tenant. You need to use Microsoft Entra workbooks to monitor identity activity. To what should you set destination details in the diagnostic settings? A. Archive to a storage account. B. Send to partner solution. C. Stream to an event hub. D. Send to log analytics workspace. Correct answer, D. Send to log analytics workspace. Explanation: Microsoft Entra workbooks use log analytics data for monitoring. Diagnostic logs must be sent to a log analytics workspace first. Question 5. You have an Azure Active Directory (Azure AD) tenant named Contoso.com. You need to ensure that Azure AD external identities pricing is based on monthly active users (MAU). What should you configure? A. A user flow. B. The terms of use. C. A linked subscription. D. An access review. Correct answer, C. A linked subscription. Explanation: external identities billing requires an Azure subscription link. Monthly active user pricing is enabled through the linked subscription. Question 6. You have a Microsoft 365 E5 subscription. You need to ensure that users can only access resources in the subscription from a device that has the Global Secure Access client connected. What should you do first? A. Enable Global Secure Access signaling. B. Enable tagging to enforce tenant restrictions. C. Create a named location. D. Create a remote network. Correct answer, A. Enable Global Secure Access signaling. Explanation: Signaling allows conditional access to detect connected devices. It confirms the global secure access client is actively connected. Question 7. You have a Microsoft Entra tenant. You open the risk detections report. Which risk detection type is classified as a user risk? A. Password spray. B. Anonymous IP address. C. Unfamiliar sign-in properties. D. Microsoft Entra threat intelligence. Correct answer, D. Microsoft Entra threat intelligence. Explanation: user risks are related to compromised user credentials or behavior. Threat intelligence detects suspicious activities linked directly to users. Question 8. You have a Microsoft Entra tenant. You open the risk detections report. Which risk detection type is classified as a user risk? A. Impossible travel. B. Anonymous IP address. C. Atypical travel. D. Leaked credentials. Correct answer D. Leaked credentials. Explanation: leaked credentials indicate compromised user account information. This detection is classified under user risk and identity protection. Question 9. You plan to deploy a new Azure AD tenant. Which multi-factor authentication (MFA) method will be enabled by default for the tenant? A. Microsoft Authenticator. B. SMS. C. Voice call. D. Email OTP. Correct answer A. Microsoft Authenticator. Explanation: Microsoft recommends Authenticator as the default MFA method. It provides secure push notifications and passwordless sign-in support. Question 10. You have an Azure Active Directory Azure AD tenant that contains cloud-based enterprise apps. You need to group related apps into categories in the My Apps portal. What should you create? A. Tags. B. Collections. C. Naming policies. D. Dynamic groups. Correct answer B. Collections. Explanation: collections organize enterprise applications inside the My Apps portal. They improve user experience by grouping related applications together. Question 11. You have an Azure AD tenant that contains a user named User1. User1 needs to manage license assignments and reset user passwords. Which roles should you assign to User1? A. Helpdesk Administrator. B. Billing Administrator. C. License Administrator. D. User Administrator. Correct answer D. User Administrator. Explanation: User Administrator can reset passwords and manage licenses. This role provides required permissions with minimal extra privileges. Question 12. You have a Microsoft Entra tenant. You need to query risky user activity for the tenant. How long will the logs of risky user activity be retained? A. 30 days. B. 60 days. C. 90 days. D. 180 days. Correct answer A. 30 days. Explanation: risky user and risk detection data are retained for 30 days. This retention period applies in Microsoft Entra Identity Protection. Question 13. You have an Azure AD tenant that contains a user named User1 and a Microsoft 365 group named Group1. User1 is the owner of Group1. You need to ensure that User1 is notified every 3 months to validate the guest membership of Group1. What should you do? A. Configure the external collaboration settings. B. Create an access review. C. Configure an access package. D. Create a group expiration policy. Correct answer B. Create an access review. Explanation: access reviews help validate guest user memberships regularly. Owners receive notifications to approve or remove guest accounts. Question 14. You have an Azure subscription named Sub1 that contains a user named User1. You need to ensure that User 1 can purchase a Microsoft Entra Permissions Management license for Sub 1. The solution must follow the principle of least privilege. Which role should you assign to User 1? A. Global Administrator. B. Billing Administrator. C. Permissions Management Administrator. D. User Access Administrator. Correct answer B. Billing Administrator. Explanation: Billing Administrator can manage purchases and subscription billing tasks. This follows least privilege without granting unnecessary administrative permissions. Question 15. You have an Azure subscription named Sub1 that contains a virtual machine named VM1. You need to enable Microsoft Entra Login for VM1 and configure VM1 to access the resources in Sub1. Which type of identity should you assign to VM1? A. Microsoft Entra User Account. B. User Assigned Managed Identity. C. Azure Automation Account. D. System Assigned Managed Identity. Correct answer D. System Assigned Managed Identity. Explanation: System Assigned Identities are tied directly to Azure resources. They allow VM1 to authenticate securely without storing credentials. Question 16. You have an Azure AD tenant and a .NET web app named App1. You need to register App1 for Azure AD authentication. What should you configure for App1? A. The executable name. B. The bundle ID. C. The package name. D. The redirect URI. Correct answer D. The redirect URI. Explanation: Redirect URI defines where authentication responses are sent. It is required during Azure AD application registration configuration. Question 17. You have a Microsoft Entra tenant named Contoso.com that contains an enterprise application named App1. A contractor uses the credentials of email protected. You need to ensure that you can provide the contractor with access to App1. The contractor must be able to authenticate as email protected. What should you do? A. Add a custom domain name to Contoso.com. B. Configure the external collaboration settings. C. Create a guest user account in Contoso.com. D. Add a WS-Fed identity provider. Correct answer C. Create a guest user account in Contoso.com. Explanation: Guest accounts allow external users to access enterprise applications. The contractor can sign in using existing external credentials securely. Question 18. You have a Microsoft Entra tenant. You need to add the Facebook social identity provider to the tenant. What should you do first? A. Add a custom domain. B. Add a WS-Fed identity provider. C. Add a SAML identity provider. D. Set enable guest self-service sign-up via user flows to yes. Correct answer D. Set enable guest self-service sign-up via user flows to yes. Explanation: Social identity providers require user flows for self-service sign-up. This setting enables external users to authenticate using Facebook accounts. Question 19. You have a Microsoft Entra tenant named Contoso.com that contains an enterprise application named App1. A contractor uses the credentials of email protected. You need to ensure that you can provide the contractor with access to App1. The contractor must be able to authenticate as email protected. What should you do? A. Run the new user complete. B. Add a custom domain name to Contoso.com. C. Run the new invitation complete. D. Implement Microsoft Entra Connect Sync. Correct answer C. Run the new invitation complete. Explanation: New invitation invites external users as guest accounts. It allows contractors to access apps using existing external identities. Question 20. You have 2,500 users who are assigned Microsoft 365 E3 licenses. The licenses are assigned to individual users. You assign Microsoft 365 E5 licenses to a group that includes all users. You need to remove the Microsoft 365 E3 licenses from the users by using the least amount of administrative effort. What should you use? A. The Update MG Group Complete. B. The Set Windows Product Key Complete. C. The Set MG User License Complete. D. The licenses blade in the Microsoft Entra Admin Center. Correct answer, D. The licenses blade in the Microsoft Entra Admin Center. Explanation: the licenses blade supports bulk license assignment management easily. It minimizes administrative effort for large numbers of users. Question 21. You have a Microsoft Entra tenant named Contoso.com that contains an enterprise application named App1. A contractor uses the credentials of email protected. You need to ensure that you can provide the contractor with access to App1. The contractor must be able to authenticate as email protected. What should you do? A. Configure the external collaboration settings. B. Run the new MG user complete. C. Create a guest user account in Contoso.com. D. Add a custom domain name to Contoso.com. Correct answer, C. Create a guest user account in Contoso.com. Explanation: guest accounts allow external users to securely access enterprise apps. The contractor can sign in using existing external account credentials. Question 22. You configure a new Microsoft 365 tenant to use a default domain name of Contoso.com. You need to ensure that you can control access to Microsoft 365 resources by using conditional access policies. What should you do first? A. Disable the user consent settings. B. Disable security defaults. C. Configure a multi-factor authentication (MFA) registration policy. D. Configure password protection for Windows Server Active Directory. Correct answer, B. Disable security defaults. Explanation: security defaults and conditional access cannot work together simultaneously. You must disable security defaults before creating conditional access policies. Question 23. You have an Azure Active Directory (Azure AD) tenant named Contoso.com. All users who run applications registered in Azure AD are subject to conditional access policies. You need to prevent the users from using legacy authentication. What should you include in the conditional access policies to filter out legacy authentication attempts? A. A cloud apps or actions condition. B. A user risk condition. C. A client apps condition. D. A sign-in risk condition. Correct answer, C. A client apps condition. Explanation: client apps conditions can detect legacy authentication protocols. You can block older authentication methods using conditional access policies. Question 24. You have an Azure Active Directory (Azure AD) tenant. You open the Risk Detections report. Which risk detection type is classified as a user risk? A. Impossible travel. B. Anonymous IP address. C. Atypical travel. D. Leaked credentials. Correct answer, D. Leaked credentials. Explanation: leaked credentials indicate a possible compromised user account. Microsoft Entra classifies this detection type as a user risk. Question 25. You have a Microsoft 365 tenant. You currently allow email clients that use basic authentication to connect to Microsoft Exchange Online. You need to ensure that users can connect to Exchange only from email clients that use modern authentication protocols. What should you implement? A. An OAuth policy in Microsoft Defender for cloud apps. B. A conditional access policy in Azure Active Directory (Azure AD). C. A compliance policy in Microsoft Endpoint Manager. D. an application control profile in Microsoft Endpoint Manager. Correct answer, B, a conditional access policy in Azure Active Directory, Azure AD. Explanation: conditional access can block legacy basic authentication connections. It ensures only modern authentication protocols are allowed for exchange. Question 26. You have an Azure AD tenant. You open the Risk Detections report. Which risk detection type is classified as a user risk? A. Password spray. B. Anonymous IP address. C. Unfamiliar sign-in properties. D. Azure AD Threat Intelligence. Correct answer, D. Azure AD Threat Intelligence. Explanation: Threat intelligence identifies suspicious user-related compromise activities. This detection type is categorized as a user risk in Azure AD. Question 27. You create a new Microsoft 365 E5 tenant. You need to ensure that when users connect to the Microsoft 365 portal from an anonymous IP address, they are prompted to use multi-factor authentication, MFA. What should you configure? A. A sign-in risk policy. B. A user risk policy. C. An MFA registration policy. Correct answer, A. A sign-in risk policy. Explanation: anonymous IP addresses are detected during risky sign-in attempts. Sign-in risk policies can enforce MFA when suspicious access occurs. Question 28. A user named User1 receives an error message when attempting to access the Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps portal. You need to identify the cause of the error. The solution must minimize administrative effort. What should you use? A. Log Analytics. B. Sign-in logs. C. Audit logs. D. Provisioning logs. Correct answer, B. Sign-in logs. Explanation: sign-in logs provide authentication failure and access details quickly. They help identify login issues with minimal troubleshooting effort required. Question 29. You have a Microsoft 365 E5 subscription that uses Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps and Yammer. You need to prevent users from signing into Yammer from high-risk locations. What should you do in the Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps portal? A. Create an access policy. B. Create an activity policy. C. Unsanction Yammer. D. Create an anomaly detection policy. Correct answer, A. Create an access policy. Explanation: access policies control app access based on user conditions. They can block sign-ins from risky or untrusted locations effectively. Question 30. You have an Azure Active Directory, Azure AD, tenant. You open the Risk Detections report. Which risk detection type is classified as a user risk? A. Impossible travel. B. Anonymous IP address. C. Malicious IP address. D. Azure AD Threat Intelligence. Correct answer, D. Azure AD Threat Intelligence. Explanation: Azure AD Threat Intelligence detects suspicious user compromise indicators. This type of detection is categorized as a user risk event. Please revise full PDF 2 to 3 times for 100% success. Check the description for the PDF download link and don't forget to subscribe to this channel for upcoming episodes. Thank you.